Okay, so we're continuing on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. We started the new Mishnah, talking again, continuing to talk about Ono. But let me just take a moment because I looked fairly extensively at a lot of sources to find, as I said, we discussed last week about Shtus. So what's really the makor of Shtus? Where does it come from? Why is six? We know Rabbi Tuvia says a third. Why not some other number, a fifth, a seventh, whatever? So it's not particularly clear. It doesn't say definitively, but from what I can understand, Rabbi Yehuda was a wine merchant, and the Gemara seems to indicate that by looking at Rabbi Yehuda and the process that it took him from getting the wine prepared to selling it, including what they call advertising and all kinds of other steps along the way, that's how they came to the Indian that what's fair to sell is nothing more than, in other words, a shtus profit is right at the edge of what is appropriate given all of the expenses and all of the what it takes to bring the wine from its source to the marketplace. So that's where the Gemara seems to indicate is the source of this, without breaking it down by percentages, X this, Y this, Z this, whatever. So that's very interesting because that is how the Gemara came to a shtus. Now, in the case of Raparfin, it's a story because the Tagrei Lud had their own cheshbonos as to what is considered profitable, and of course, there's a very big difference between a third and a sixth. It's not, again, I didn't go too much into that, but these all come about. There's a certain seichel to it. They all come about as a result of the costs of bringing food to the marketplace. But what's also important is the emphasis that shtus applies to basic living staples. That's also an impression that the Gemara gives, is that it isn't for everything. It isn't for every food or maybe every delicacy or whatever. It's for the basic staples. In other words, when you need bread and you need milk or in other words, the things that you need for chiyus. I'm not talking about anything that's more fancy than that. That's where the emphasis is on shtus, is that you shouldn't take advantage of those things that are basic staples for life. And again, they didn't enumerate specifically, but the Gemara does indicate that it has to do with what is the basic necessities of life. That's where the Indian of shtus comes in. And seemingly for more extravagant things or for more elaborate preparation, the cost of labor is also considered in the equation for shtus. Now, so in the case of Rabbi Yehuda, we were talking about wine, whatever the labor was for wine. But you can imagine if you're selling something that's very intricate in its preparation, the labor would be a lot more expensive. So again, we're not going to get into that minutia, but just keep it in mind that in the time of the Gemara, they were more concerned about focusing on what is basic for life's essentials, and that's where the Indian of shtus came in. That you shouldn't take advantage, so that people should not have the essentials of for their families.
Rabbi, does the concept of labor contemplate that if a person is tending their own field, for example, let's say in the case of a vineyard, as you use as an example, that their labor is free, implicit, they're selling the product, so preparation is not a cost of preparing, and that's why a shtus is factored in? Because it would seem like if you considered labor on top of that, a shtus would not be significant margin for the cost to prepare.
Well, again, from what I can understand, I think labor is a factor, and again, you have to in the case of Rabbi Yehuda, where the origin of this, let's just say, so if he had a vineyard, okay, like someone else has a farm or someone else has an orchard, he had a vineyard, and he had grapes. So he was a winemaker. So from the time that the grapes were ripe and ready to be picked to the time that you complete the process, which I guess includes fermentation and the time and all of that, whatever it takes. So every single aspect of it, it becomes another factor in the cost of getting to where you can sell the product. So Chazal, I mean, in terms of analyzing that, what they must have seen is that taking all of these components, and again, what's the multiple? I mean, how many people are you selling to? Because you have to have a multiple here. You can't just say, all right, I'm selling to 10 people, my cost would be astronomical. I'm selling to 1,000, I'm selling to more people. So I'm not sure how they made that cheshbon. Honestly, I don't. But the answer is yes, that labor is a factor, and that because that's an expense. If you had to hire some workers to pick the grapes and press the grapes, and maybe he himself didn't necessarily do all the manual work, but he oversaw it and whatever. So all of those different components in their proportion, which the Gemara does not explain, doesn't say what that proportion is, but it just says these are all the factors. Having considered all the factors, a shtus was the right number to come out with. That's the closest I've come to understanding where shtus comes from, because otherwise, it's a random number as far as we're concerned. Could have been something else, and we see from a what it is. But so the answer is yes, Michael, that the labor was a factor. How much of a factor in proportion, I can't answer, but they did consider that as one of the cost factors in coming up with a number of what is fair to sell the product. Okay, so that's a little bit of more of a background, which may or may not help much because there wasn't a whole lot of detail, but at least that's the source of where shtus really comes from. Is from Rabbi Yehuda, who was a wine merchant, and how they analyzed his situation. Okay, so last week we started the Mishnah, we completed the Mishnah, and we went through sort of a brief understanding, because the Mishnah says that echad halokeach ve'echad hamoicher, that both the buyer and seller have oino. So the Gemara, at least in the initial phase, wanted to understand why it had to say both the lokeach and the moicher instead of just making a sweeping statement. And the Gemara explained to us that if it's one, we wouldn't understand the other, and if it's the other, we wouldn't understand this one, which is again very typical in the Gemara style, is that we want to understand why they enumerate specifics, is because we say, because one without the other would not have been an easy understanding. So you have to go through the details of both, and then we come out to the point where the Gemara says tzricha. That's what remember, this has been a Torah, because the Torah says it. So the Gemara says tzricha, that we need both the lokeach and the mocher to be enumerated for us to understand the full understanding. So now we're going to pick up from the next line, because we said that Rabbi Yehuda says ein anor l'tager, that there is no anor for the storekeeper, and Rashi said in the Mishnah l'kamen mefarish. He didn't explain what does Rabbi Yehuda mean. So the Gemara now is going to explain to us a very interesting machlokes here, a discussion. What Rabbi Yehuda means when he says ein anor l'tager, that there is no fraud for a tager, for a merchant who sells the product. Says the Gemara, Mishum shehu tager ein lo hano. I mean, just a very straightforward question. Just because he is a tager, there's no ano. You're basically taking a tager out of the equation for ano entirely. Here we've been talking about fraud by a seller, and how do we deal with it? And you're telling me that for that for a tiger, for a merchant, there is no hano. What's Pshat Rabbi Yehuda? So now here's where we get into it very interesting. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav. Rav Nachman says in the name of Rav, you know what we're talking about? Bitagor Safsor Shani. We're talking about a specific type of Tager. And what type of Tager was he? He was a Tager, says the Gemara, Saftor. And Saftor means essentially someone who is a broker, someone who buys and sells in the marketplace all the time. So if someone was a wine merchant, let's say he was a wine merchant or any merchant, and he was at the same time not just a merchant but also a broker, then says Rabbi Yehuda that he, when he sells, cannot say, I know that I undersold. I made a mistake, and therefore I should be given the opportunity to retract my mistake. So now let's analyze this. Correct the Gemara, my Tama, why is a Tager Safto different than, let's say, a regular Tager? Says the Gemara, made the Yoda Dzavinte Kama Shavya. There's no question, says the Gemara, that he knows exactly what he's doing. He's not, I mean, he does his research, and they have, especially today, we know that everything is so sensitive to the moment that you can through analyzing data that comes on your computer, you know when there's a shift in the marketplace almost hourly or maybe less than hourly to adjust your prices. But that's what happens all the time in the marketplace, is that in that time they didn't have all the sophistication, but they knew what was going on in the marketplace. Either they had information passed to them, or they had people who were out, a network of people who were constantly reporting back to them. Well, we can understand that. We can understand that they knew what was going on. So he says, "May the Yoda does it into." There's no question, says Rabbi Nachman ben Rav, that the mocher, the tagir, knew what was going on. And if he went ahead and established a price which was, let's say, lower than it should have been, for which you might think he was being that there should be a shtus, because therefore he should collect, if you would think so, right? So it says he said, no, I'm Michael that amount. V'hai zavna hachi. And when he sold the item for the price which he sold it, it's b'shum disramile zavinte achriti. Remember, he's a broker. He sees an opportunity for a huge purchase at a very discounted price. He needs cash, he needs the money, so he dumps the product for below market, gets a quick sale, turns around, and makes his profit on the acquisition of a bigger sale that is coming his way. And that's what brokers do. Brokers buy and sell all the time. I mean, you think of today's stock market, but I mean, you have to sometimes sacrifice money to make money. So the Gemara is saying that a tager, someone who is a seller, a saftor, meaning a tager who is also a broker in the marketplace, he knows exactly what he's doing. So you can't attribute a no to what he's doing, because there is a method to his madness. Has a cheshbon. I'm going to undersell here to make more money there. So there he should not have the opportunity of them coming back and saying, right? And he's going to, what is he going to say? He's going to say, "V'hashta mia kahadame." Okay, I have charata. Now I want to go ahead and I want to claim that there was a no here, and therefore I should be able to get my my differential money back. Says the Gemara, no. In that kind of situation, we say he knows what he's doing, and therefore, if he undersells, he can't get a second crack at the apple to come back and say, no, I made a mistake. So that's shot in Rabbi Yehuda. In an Ola Tager, he's saying because he's more than knowledgeable of what's going on, therefore we can't give him a break. Now, in contrast to that position, there's another position which is diametrically opposed. So look at this. So Rav Nachman Rav says we don't give the Tager the benefit of the doubt because of the Saftor because he knows what he's doing. Comes Rav Ashi says, my Tager I know. You know what it says? There's no price for a Tager. Eina b'teres I know. It means no, I know it doesn't even apply to him. But the reverse, she'afilu pachos mechdei ayno chayzer. Rashi is giving license to the tager that even if it's less than a shtus, for which we normally say what? Michael, right? We said on Rava. Rava told us the halacha that less than a 6 with this mechila. Says Rashi, no, there's not. He says that even for less than a 6, you can the Tagir can come back and say no, I'm recanting and there is no. Okay. Now what's Rav Ashi's reason? So the explanation in Rav Ashi is the exact opposite. That since the Tagir, his whole life is, his livelihood, basically his livelihood is tied up into selling. We can't take advantage that if he somehow made a mistake, that he should not have the opportunity of recanting. So what Rav Ashi is saying is the opposite of Rav Nachman Barav. Nachman Barav says that a Tager Safter knows exactly what he's doing, and when he undersells for a reason, because he has a better opportunity somewhere else, so he wants to dump it on the market here to get it there. Therefore, no, there's no way that it can. But Rashi says, since he is, this is his whole field, his whole livelihood is selling, we cannot constrain him and read into what he's doing, and therefore, if there's a mistake, meaning that there is a shtus in what's going on, but Rav Ashi goes so far as to say afilu pachas, even more, meaning less than a shtus, less than 1/6. We have to give the Tagir the benefit of the doubt that he made a mistake, because otherwise, if he makes these mistakes, which let's say is an honest mistake, then this affects his livelihood. So Rav Ashi is very lenient on the Tagir by saying that he can get away with it. So since Rashi discusses Rahman and Moshe, let's see, is this Rashi here?
Excuse me, Rabbi, why can't we say the same logic for a regular person selling things at a garage sale? You don't know whether he wants to unload stuff now because he knows of another garage sale that he can get a killing on, something
but you see,
wants.
That again, we can extrapolate what you're saying, but al pi seichel, a person who's in the marketplace and he's sensitive to what's going on, and think about it in terms of stocks or anything else, whether you have an expert who is in the business, so to speak, and he needs cash, he needs money to make another purchase to keep selling. So if you keep that in mind, then it's easier to understand why underselling is part of the strategy of making more money by having the cash to buy. We're talking about you and me and garage sales, and in other words, we're not Bikiim. Do you know there's a great deal coming around the corner that if you had enough money, you'd be able to buy a big closeout? No, we don't know that. Typically, we don't know that. But a Tiger who's a safta or he's a broker and he has his ear to the ground, he knows exactly what's going on. Says Rav Nachman, no, don't worry about him. He's not going to lose anything. If he's underselling, it's for an absolute reason. Rav Ashi, on the other hand, says no, he doesn't attribute all of that to the Tiger, but certainly Rav Nachman Barav did, and that's why he's saying a Tiger is not like everybody else, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda said that there's no know about the Tiger because he is a baki and he knows exactly the ins and outs of his
So they
business.
had their own definitions of what a business broker, whatever is, and it
Yeah,
has to be well known that that's what his livelihood is.
right.
So, but it's a little strange that they're taking certain people because a broker can be one day he's a broker, the next day he goes
Yeah,
bankrupt, and he's, I
but
mean,
again, yeah,
make these
look,
absolute distinctions in order to have this Gemara, work out. Somebody is definitely a broker, and then the next person is definitely not a broker.
right. So we're saying someone who is, and we're not going to go back and forth. Someone, and Rabbi Yehuda says, when Rabbi Yehuda says his words that ein oino l'tager, he is referring to a tager who is a broker who knows what's going on. A regular tager, Rabbi Yehuda would not necessarily attribute to the fact, because we know, of course, from all the Gemara we've learned that both a lokeach and a mocher. Who's a mocher? A mocher is usually a storekeeper or someone who knows what's going on. But here, Rabbi Yehuda says, when I say that there's no anor to a tiger, I mean a specialized tiger, a tiger who's also a broker who knows that in the marketplace there are opportunities, and therefore, whatever he does, we say he does it because he's opportunistic. And he knows that if he takes advantage of this situation, then another situation is about to crop up that will increase his livelihood. Rashi, on the other hand, has more rachmanis on the tiger. He's saying, "What do you want from the poor tiger? The tiger doesn't know what's going on. He makes a big mistake. His livelihood is impacted tremendously. We can't afford that because then he'll stop being in other words, in order to keep commerce flowing, we have to have buyers and sellers. We have to have a tiger. We have to have if a tiger will be through his own, let's say, ignorance, okay. But if he's taken advantage of, then he'll say, I can't afford this anymore. I mean, if unless I'm so sharp that I know everything that's going on, I can't necessarily get away with it. But here, according to Rav Ashi, the Chiddush, what's the real Chiddush? The Chiddush is not that the storekeeper can claim oino, but he can claim oino with less than a shtus. That's Rav Ashi's Chiddush. That for a storekeeper, basically all bets are off, and he can even claim oino if the price differential was less than a 6. Why? Because it's his livelihood, even with less than a 6, says Rashi, Rav Ashi, and that's his opinion, that even with less than a 6, it's too damaging to him that if he loses money from enough people, he'll really go broke. So it seems like Rav Ashi is protecting the seller against himself, against mistakes, which obviously they're indicating were made of plenty. There were plenty of mistakes made. And Rav Nachman Barav says, no, a seller who is a saftor doesn't make mistakes. It's all calculated, and it's calculated to his benefit. Therefore, if he decides, you know what, this time I'm going to go ahead and complain that I undersold, and therefore I'm going to collect my money, we say no. As a general rule, we're not allowing that because he's a saftar and he should know better. So basically, that's how the Gemara is positioning itself in this machlokes. Now, so the Gemara now wants to understand who's the, you have two shittas and they're diametrically opposed. So who is it like? Who's the halacha like? Says the Gemara. Tanya Kavasa de Rav Nachman, says the Gemara that I'm going to show you from a brisa the halacha is like Rav Nachman. How? Beferish, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, Tager ein lo hano. There is no price for by a tager. If they shu baki, because he's a baki. So that brisa clearly supports Rav Nachman because it says in so many words because he's a baki, not because he doesn't know his livelihood and will make mistakes like Rav Ashi, but like Rav Nachman Barav, because he's a baki, therefore we don't worry about him. When he's making a deal, he's making a deal because he knows the outcome of the next opportunity, and therefore Bikias means that there is no shtus. There's no ona, then therefore shtus doesn't apply. Okay, so that's how the Gemara wants to understand Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda leans towards the Tagir not having the same advantages of a buyer or of a regular person. In other words, and the Tagir here we say is a soft or is a broker. But again, what we take away is that by a regular Tagir, even Rabbi Yehuda would admit that a regular Tagir has to be protected, just like everybody else. But here we're talking about a specialized Tagir who's also a broker who understands the marketplace, and therefore we don't give him the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so now the Gemara asks an interesting question. If we go back and we take a look on Nunamid Beis, and Nunamid Beis is where Rava said the halacha. So let's just go back for a minute in Nunamid Beis. We said Omar Rava, that Rava said Hilchasa, the halacha is Pachos Mishtus Nikna Mecca. There is no shtus when it's less than a 6. Yosal shtus if it's more than a 6. Bottle Mecca. The sale is voided. Shtus Kona Omachzor. But for an exact 6, then the Kona Omachzor no, that you can go back and collect. You can't invalidate the sale, but you can collect the shtus. And the Gemara there said, brought a raya to Rava, and this is what's important now for discussion. Tanya goes to Rava and brings that brisa and says exactly the words of Rava and says Divrei Rab Nosson. That's Rab Nosson, who was a Tana. So he says in that brisa exactly what Rava is saying, what Rava is paskening la halacha, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who's the Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, he's the one who said Yad Moicher Al Ha'Elyono, that the mocher, he picks the mocher as an example. Again, that becomes a question for us in our Gemara now. He says that the mocher, if his hand is al Elyono, if he's the transaction has happened and he already has the money, he can make a decision either to void the deal or to get his shtus back. Remember, we said that the Mishnah is not like the halacha. The halacha is not like that, like Rava. But Rabbi Yehuda says different. Okay, so with that in mind, with that machlokes of Tanoim between Rabbi Nosson and Rabbi Yehuda, now the Gemara asks the following question: My misnissen, who is the Tana of our Mishnah? When our Mishnah says here that there is shtus, in other words, we have the Tanakama saying that there is shtus across the board, and Rabbi Yehuda says Eino no the Tager, and Rabbi Yehuda then says Yada al Yoina, he's the one who makes the decision. So who's the Tana of our Mishnah? Is it Rab Nosson, who paskins like Rava, or is it Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who doesn't say like Rava and says that in the case of shtus, you have a choice to upend the deal or get your money back. So now the Gemara is asking, who is this Mishnah like? Okay, says the Gemara, Loi Rab Nosson, V'loi Rab Yehuda Nosson. It seems that this Mishnah is not like either Rab Nosson or Rab Yehuda Nosson. It has to be. I mean, if this is the machlokes, Mishnah has to be coming out like one of them. Says the Gemara, it seems like that it's neither. Why? So let's go through this to understand why he's saying that. E Rab Nosson, if you say the Mishnah comes out like Rab Nosson, who says la halacha like Rava, then we have a stira, right? Masnisun Katani Rotza. Let's look at the words of the Mishnah. The words of the Mishnah are, look at the last line of the Mishnah. Mishahut Lolav, he who has the control of the deal, Yoda ala Yoina, he dictates, Rotza omolo tenli mos, o tenli masha onisi. Again, So if it's Rab Nosson, who is the Tana of the Mishnah, it says the word Rotza. What does Rotza means? If he wants. But Ubraisa Lokatani Rotza. If we look at the Brisa does not say Rotza. So and Rab Nosson in that Brisa, the Tanya Kavasa, which I just read again, what does he say? It says Tanya Kavasa de Rava. There is no Ratzon, there is no choice. The word Ratzon means if he wants. So where is the choice? If you're going to say the source for Rab Nosson is the Brisa. The question is the Mishnah also like Rab Nosson? The Brisa there says what Rab Nosson says. What about the Mishnah? So the Gemara is now telling us the Mishnah can't come out like Rab Nosson because there is a differentiation between the Brisa where he says the halacha and the Mishnah where he says Rotza. Did he have a choice? He didn't give you a choice in the Brisa. So how can Rab Nosson be the mandam of the Mishnah where there is a choice? That's the kasha. In other words, there has to be a consistency to understand whether it's Rab Nosson or Rab Yehuda who is the real author of. In other words, who do we pass like in the Mishnah? And if you're going to say it's Rab Nosson, then there's a stira because the Brisa says one thing and the Mishnah says something else. So it can't be Rab Nosson. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Okay, so then maybe it's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Also, is a problem. Why is there a problem with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? Because Masnisin Ketani Lokeya. The Mishnah says, give me my money. Who says give me my money? A buyer. Because a buyer has given the seller his money and gotten the produce. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, what's the choice? Give me my money, or give me the differentiation of the six. And what does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi say in the Brisa? We go back and look at the Brisa. In the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, Yad Moicher al Ha'elyono. He's talking about the Moicher, that the Moicher's hands are the Alyoina. So how can the Mishnah come out like Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi if he says in the Brisa we're talking about a seller and the Mishnah clearly is talking about a buyer? How does the Mishnah come out like Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara's kasha is, no matter how you slice it, there's a problem. There's a stira to both Rab Nosson and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi between the Brisa and the Mishnah. So if they're not on all fours, if you can't show the Mishnah and the Brisa being the same, in other words, they're talking about the same thing, then to whom do we attribute the Mishnah? Says so. According to the Gemara, it's not Rab Nosson and it's not Rabbi Yehuda. That's the sort of the cryptic question that the Gemara is asking here: is how do we understand the Mishnah? So the Gemara wants to give the following answer. Take a look, and if you see in the parenthesis, it says Simin Zayin Beis Reish Himin. Now we've had this before, this pneumatic that when you have Rosh Tevis like that, it's referring to different answers or interpretations from different people. So here, the Zayin Beis Reish Shimon are four different Amoraim who we're now going to enumerate, who each give an answer to this kasha. Who is the Mishnah like? L'chayr, it's not Rab Nosson or Rab Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Simin Zayin Beis Reish Shimon. There's four answers. So let's see what the four answers are. Okay, who is the four answers? The first is a Zayin. So the Zayin, says the Gemara, refers to Rabbi Elazar. The Zayin, again, how they picked this is very, very interesting. But Rabbi Elazar, the Zayin from Rabbi Elazar is the Zayin. What does Rabbi Elazar say? So Rabbi Elazar basically punts. This is a total punt because he says, "Oh no, Zu ena yodea misha no." I don't know who is the Manda Amar. In other words, he's basically saying you're right. It can't be Rab Nosson. It can't be Rabbi Yehuda for the reasons we just said. So I'm punting. I'm saying I don't know who the Mishnah is like. I mean, that's kind of how else would you describe this? But he's basically saying we don't know who the Tana of the Mishnah is. Okay, so let's not going to dwell on that, but that's his position. Comes Rabbah The next letter in the mnemonic is Beis. Beis stands for Rabba. Rabba Omer, Rabba says, La'olam Rab Nosson he. Really, the Mishnah is like Rab Nosson. But if it's like Rab Nosson, then we have a problem because the Mishnah says Rotza, that if he wants, and in the Brisa, there's no choice. There's no Rotza. There's no options according to Rab Nosson. It's just simply what it is. Less than a 6, no. More than a 6, yes. An exact 6, you get your differential. But there's no Rotza where he has a choice to take his money, not take his money. Says Rabbah, Usenei Nami Kebraisa Rotza. And so again, you have to take these interpretations with a grain of salt, because on the surface, there is nothing whatsoever to give us any indication of who the halacha should be like. So when these Amoraim come along and they want to start making interpretations, the question is, okay, so what do you hang your hat on? Rabbi Loza says, forget about it. We don't know. It's neither. Rabbi says it's Rab Nosson. But if it's Rab Nosson, what do you do with the stira? So here's how he answers the stira. Usenei nami bebraisa rotza. Assume that there is a rotza in the brisa. So he's now telling you, whereas the Mishnah says rotza and the brisa doesn't say rotza, imputed as if the brisa did say rotza. Where does he get that from? I mean, Rabbi is he's kind of plucking that out of thin air. He's saying that the brisa means rotza. It doesn't say it, but it means rotza. So that's a shver kasha. How can you say that it means rotza when he doesn't say it means rotza? So that's a difficulty. I don't know how Rabbi gets around that, but he says that that's what the brisa means. So Rav Nosson says rotza in both cases. In other words, if you want, you can take that option of getting the differential, or you can take the option of avoiding the sale. So that's Rabba's terrace. Again, you can't ask too many kashas here because Rabba is just telling you that's what the Bryce is imputing. We don't see that, and we don't understand where he gets it from. But that's Rabba's position. He says it's not a problem because I see that Rab Nosson means that in the Bryce. Again, that's a little bit schwer. Rava Omar, Rava takes the other approach. No, the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. But if you say it's a Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, then we have a problem between what he says in the Brisa Meicher and what he says in the Mishnah Lokeach. So he's using different people. If he's using different people, it would seem that they're not on all fours. So he too gives a kind of a ambiguous answer. And what does he say? He says, and what was lacking in the Mishnah, so Rabba's position is that he means both, but he gave one example in the Mishnah, which is the Lokeya, and he gave one example in the Brisa, which is the Meicher. Again, they're all, it applies everywhere, but instead of saying Meicher and Lokeya in the Brisa and Meicher and Lokeach in the Mishnah, he picks one here and one here. So again, we scratch our heads and we say, okay, there's no way of proving it. The point here is sometimes you can bring a raya and say, oh yes, that's what he means. He basically is saying that's what is going on over here. That the same Manda Omar between the Mishnah and the Brisa is just selecting one example in the Mishnah, one example in the Brisa, but he means both. So the truth is, all three of these answers are somewhat difficult. But the Gemara says, Dekanami, we're going to bring a proof to this last one, to Rava, that what? The Echad, the Ketani Echad Halokeach ve'Echad HaMocher, that he means both, right? That the Mishnah says, when the Mishnah said the buyer and the seller, it means both, but he selects one as an example. umafarish lelokeach, and he only goes on to explain the lokeach in the Mishnah, but he means the moicher. But he also means the moicher. So why? Shema mino shiure shiare lemocher. So again, he's saying that there is no reason to exclude the moicher, but instead of being verbose and saying both, he's giving you one example. So, so who's the fourth person? The fourth person in the pneumatic is Ravashi, right? Ravashi. It says Shin. The Shin is Ravashi. Comes Ravashi and he says Dekanami, that the raya is that it's really both the lokeach and the mocher, because the beginning of the Mishnah is echad lokeach and echad mocher, but we pick one as opposed to the other because we want to just focus as an example. Shema mina. So this whole Gemara is, this last piece is a little, it's a little ambiguous because here you have one Rabbi Lezer who says, I don't know who it's like. Rabba who says it's definitely Rav Nosson, and Rava who says it's like a Muna Nasi, and Rav Ashi comes along and says that Rava is right. Rava is right, that it's Rav Yehuda Hanasi, and the problem with the kasha of Lokeach and Meicher is not a kasha because he's giving you an example in the Mishnah of one type of Aino for the Lokeach, and in the Brisa, he's giving you an example of another type of Aino for the Meicher. Okay, enough said on that. I mean, I don't know, we can't go into it further, but again, it gives you a little bit of an insight in the Gemara here, because the Gemara is grappling with this whole question, and from our standpoint, we were looking for facts. I know, Michael, you would be asking this question of, where does he get this from? How does he know that it's the Meicher and the Lokeach when it says one and the other? So again, we have to impute that they understood that the Mishnah and the Brisa are not a stira, that they're coming to complement each other, and that each one focuses on one aspect, one on the Mishnah, one on the Meicher, and one on the Lokeach.
And Rabbi,
now it's a little unsettling.
Say it again, what, Jay?
Still sounds a little unsettling.
It's a little unsettling, but again, sometimes we have to take these of the Gemara with a grain of salt and not sort of really, drill down too deeply and say, because again, these were the giants of Torah. So when they say something that sounds, where did he get this from? If you said it or I said it, where do we pluck this from? How do you make this up? I mean, again, with Ruach HaKodesh, we don't ask.
Rabbi, it's ironic that the first interpretation is, I don't know who it's like.
That's the most honest interpretation.
And then everyone else opines, and they form two form that you Rabbi Yehuda Rebbe.
But understand, Rabbi Eliezer was a tremendous. He himself was a god, right. And if he comes back and he says, "I've analyzed Rav Nosson, I've analyzed Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and I don't understand how either of them can be the time of the Mishnah. I don't know."
And why wouldn't you be explicit? Because you could see that there is some ambiguity here. So why wouldn't the author of the Mishnah be medactic as to?
Exactly. Again, it's hard. Something again. We have the benefit of looking at it in hindsight and taking it apart, and we don't have the benefit of contemporaneous understanding. I mean, you have these Gedolim, right? The Tanoim, the Amoraim. They were in the Parsha, right? They were creating this halacha. This is halacha. Before the Shulchan Aruch, this is halacha. So they're creating a halacha, and they're saying basically, this is the halacha. So, and we have to follow. Again, in the time, they have to follow. Who do you paskin like? So if we're going to paskin at the end of the day and say that Rav Ashi is interpreting the halacha like Rava, which is the halacha, then that's what everybody is beholden to. They're beholden to that halacha, that there is Ainoah for the Lokeach and for the Meicher. And the reason why the Mishnah and the Brisa aren't identical is because in one case they emphasize the story of the Lokeach and talk about him. And then the Brisa, they emphasize the story of the Meicher and they talk about him. So that, okay, so everybody kind of accepts, all right, that's the halacha. So everybody, and again, we're not any different than we were all in the previous discussion because we say I know applies to everybody. That was the general consensus, is that I know applies to the Lokeach and to the Meicher. So now we're concluding and we're saying, yes, the halacha is that it applies to the Lokeach and to the Meicher, and take the Mishnah and the Brisa as one entity. One of them is here, one of them is here, but you merge them together.
They had no problem because there was no Gemara to look up.
Right. I mean, again, right. They didn't have a whole document.
That's all they had.
Well, but they were creating the halacha. I mean, they were Masader, and again, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, because he was the last, he was the one who took all of the compilation of all of the different Tanoim, and that's why his imprimatur is the most important, is because, like we always say, that you have to go to the later and the later and the later, because the later have the benefit of the former, right? The former didn't have the benefit of the later. So the former is going through it, it makes a lot of sense. But then later on, you had Tanoim who had a different view, which made sense. But there was no longer, the earlier Tana was no longer around. I mean, or maybe he was around, but the Tanoic period lasted long enough that the early Tanoim didn't have the benefit of the later Tanoim. That's why we say we go by the latest, because the latest encompasses everything from before and now. And again, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was a consensus. He didn't foist his opinion on everybody. He was Masader what had already been discussed. Okay. So let's just leave that there. It's a little bit of a cryptic discussion, but we've come to understand that the Gemara sometimes has that kind of a discussion. So now we have a very interesting discussion going forward. Says the Gemara Itmar. Okay, we learned the following, which is what? In other words, we know what ono is. Okay, we've already gone through enough that we know what ono is. Now, this is a very bold-faced statement. If someone says to his friend, I'm selling you this chayfetz, but there's a condition. Right? Why didn't we think of this before? I'm selling you an object, but I'm telling you, you have to pledge to me that by buying this object, you're not going to come after me for I know. So, I mean, he's making a very straightforward condition. You take it or leave it, but don't come back to me.
This is
the Rabbi, isn't that against?
Don't tell me that there was a price for it.
Against halacha to say that, you can't prevail upon the halacha and write it in there. It's the law. So you're overriding the law. And you can actually do that. You can actually have a contract that says you can do that.
Yeah. So just hold a couple of seconds, because this is opening the door to a new discussion that we're going to have to sort of mold and understand. So it's not so simple.
Theoretically, there's no limitation to putting conditions on a sale.
That may be true. In other words, I'm the purveyor. I make my rules. These are my rules. You don't want to buy my rules, don't buy my product.
Right.
So, right? I mean that would be what we would understand today in our time in the 21st century. There's conditions. I'm selling, I'm buying, but here are the conditions. Either abide by them and don't make the deal. So the question is, Al pi halacha, is that acceptable? So that's the question, Michael. In other words, al pi halacha, is it acceptable to say that what we know to be a violation of halacha can be waived? I know is a halacha. It's a halacha on the Torah. Can you waive that? That's the question.
Well, you can't violate another halacha just because you're trying to make a sale.
Right.
I mean, that's
okay. So is it obvious on his face that you can or can't? I mean, that's the question. So, like every good discussion, there's a machlokes. What's the machlokes? and this is not just Stama Machlekes, this is a Machlekes between Rav and Shmuel, two of the giants of the Gemara. Rav says, Michael, that notwithstanding your condition that you can't have a taina on me, it makes no difference. If you sell it to him, you have a taina on him. And by the way, in common law, I just want to make a point. In common law, as many of you may know this, but when a company makes a disclaimer that you're buying this, but you should know that you cannot have any tinnitus, you can't complain, you can't this, you can that, you would think that if I bought that with the disclaimer in big bold letters, that I am prohibited from suing. The answer is no. You can still sue and collect, notwithstanding the disclaimer. So this shouldn't be a shock to us. The fact that someone says, Menashe, ain't li oino, Rav says, forget about the disclaimer. You have no right to limit the opportunity for someone to claim fraud. Push it. That's Rav's position.
I don't think it works that way today with eBay. If the seller on eBay says this is as is, no guarantees, this and that, I'm not sure whether you can go back and try and sue him. I don't know how they.
I can't specifically answer you about that, but I can tell you that in the general marketplace, again, in our common law, case law is ripe with lawsuits that have been made, and lawyers will tell you that if you want to protect yourself, I mean, you've got to literally bend over backwards and with disclaimers, and then hope later that there isn't a judge who somehow knocks the disclaimer out. Disclaimers are not what they seem to be.
Right. So
the
take
point.
an example. Take an example of something. Go back, what is it, 25 years to the fertilizer mill organite, where there were disclaimers from the manufacturer that, if there's any harm, it's on you, and then they found it was cancer causing.
Okay.
You're going to override that disclaimer because of public interest. So
public interest, that's a key word. So Rob is basically saying it's in the public interest to keep someone responsible not to commit fraud. And therefore, even if he disclaims it and the buyer says, okay, I agree, notwithstanding, Rob says, you still have a no. Okay, now, hold on. Shmuel Omer, that's Rav. Shmuel comes along and says, Ein lo alav no. That if you disclaim and you accept the disclaimer, then you don't have a taina. No one put a gun to your head that you had to make this deal. You did it voluntarily. If you did it voluntarily and the seller has rules, you have to abide by the rules. Otherwise, if you don't abide by the rules, then it's hefker. There is no rules in commerce. If you can say, oh, yes, I agree, and then not agree and file a lawsuit.
just one point to consider before we read further is the fact that why would you construct an agreement for sale any other way if that was permissible? In other words, if you're the seller, why would you not have that you have to agree to my terms to avoid no in any circumstance if that is permissible?
Right. So in your question, there's a subtlety, Michael, that we're going to now open up because you asked the right question. In other words, why would you, right? The initial question is, why would you make that statement in the first place? Do you know there's a no, oh no? Or do you not know there is oh no? When I'm selling you something, do I know at the moment that I'm selling you, oh boy, I know that this is a major price fraud, but I want him to agree that he can't back out. Or you and I were friends. I'm a storekeeper. I want to sell you something. I don't know if there's a no or not. I'm selling it to you. If it happens to be, oh no, don't come back to me.
And Rabbi, wouldn't you do that so you wouldn't have to deal with oh no? You wouldn't have any repercussions? Because if you could do that, why wouldn't you do that all the time? Because then you don't have any problems, anyone questioning you. Somebody may not want to sign that deal, but if they don't want to, you don't want to go through the trouble of doing that.
No, but you see, that really leads to the question of whether or not in the marketplace, you have a buyer and a seller who are all fair-minded, equal people. I'm not looking to cheat you. I'm selling to you as if we are buyer seller, but we're also friends and I'm not taking advantage. But I want you to know that if for some reason I made a mistake and I charged you a little bit more, unbeknownst to me, because I don't know what the market is, don't come back to me later and have a taina. In other words, even
see,
though
that's
I'm an
the public
honest
interest. If the whole reason for
but remember, Oino is a
right. You may have made a
I
mistake,
know.
so you have a right to rectify a mistake. And here you're saying, I'm protecting myself, even if I made a mistake or if I did it intentionally,
So Michael,
you can't come
no,
back.
I understand your point, but keep in mind what's going on here is that undoing deals, and if you're going to undo a deal after deal after deal, it's going to become very complicated for the seller and his business. So, in other words, okay, I charged you a little bit more. Okay, I didn't mean to let it go, and therefore I'm saying to you in advance, agree with me that I have no intent of cheating you. But if there is a no, then you're going to say no big deal. For you as a single buyer, it may not be a big deal. For me as a seller, I may have 100 people to deal with, and my whole business is going to be up in smoke.
Which is why I don't understand. Well, we haven't read through. I'm not.
Right. I'm just right. We're going to go into this
So,
deeper.
but if the halacha is that you can put that stipulation in, it really is contra public interest. That's all I'll say.
I love Michael's question. I'm envious that he asked it and I didn't think of it.
Yeah, but the principle of stipulating conditions is part and parcel of what Mekach and Memker is. In other words, buying and selling isn't just straightforward. Here it is, you pay me. Oftentimes, inherent in every deal, there are conditions. There are conditions. Okay, so conditions becomes a fact of life in a deal.
But you have a law, Rabbi, that's protecting both parties, assuming that even with the
look
ambiguity
today.
of the last Gemara,
right?
That you're protecting both parties. And here you're saying, well, I'm going to sign, I'm putting a stipulation in that you are not protected. You're going to have to agree by me, which is contra the interest of halacha, the based in ensuring proper sales and purchases. So it really is, it's contrary to the halacha that you are writing in a stipulation that is anti the halacha.
So let me ask you a different question. Today, in modern times, if I sell, if a store sells you an item, some stores have a restrictive return policy, some have a more liberal return policy. If the policy was you have 30 days to return, then you have 30 days to return. There are companies that say, whether it's a sale or not, I'm not going to go into that all sales are final. You come into us, you make a purchase, the sale is final. Now, you come back and now, of course, if you find that the product is defective, then that overrides everything. But absent that, you can't come back and say, oh, I have charata. I didn't, you know what? I don't really need this suit right now, and I don't want to spend this money. It was a spur of the moment. I didn't mean it, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So now take back at the time of the Gemara, okay, it was a sale opportunity, and someone created a condition and said, you know what? What then was considered, what we consider a sale opportunity is what he's talking about. Oh no. And he's saying that, Amanasha and Litaina, I know. You can't come back to me. That's kind of the return policy. You can't come back to me and say you overcharged me, and therefore I should have a right. So if you,
which is why I have a whole problem with the concept of no, because buyers and sellers should be knowledgeable in terms so somebody is desperate to get something. I mean, if a seller is open till 8 o'clock at night in the times of the Gemara, and everybody else is closed, but I absolutely have to have that for my dinner that night, I should be able to pay a premium, even if I charge more, because I'm open at that time, I'm making sacrifices, and that's a buyer and seller. That's a free market system. So why is the Beis Din getting involved in that discussion?
Again, I mean, you're right. You're right that there is a certain sort of maybe in your example, sort of a premium because you're doing something with Slim Shores because you're selling it when nobody else is around.
That's
But-
understood by
but the
people. If somebody has to come in on a weekend, you have a flat tire, you need a tire, right, to go back to New York.
You have to compensate.
Somebody says, look, I'll open up the store, I'll get you a tire, this and that. It's gonna cost you more. You have
But the
to.
concept of
everybody
Onah
knows
doesn't allow that.
Right, okay, so these are all, I mean, everything we've discussed here has a certain validity. So let's just hold off, because I said that this is touching on something now, that let's just go a little bit weiter. So the Gemara wants now to tell us that this Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, who were Amoraim, among the first of the Amoraim, is a Machlokes Tanoim. The same Machlokes between Rav and Shmuel is a Machlokes Tanoim. Says the Gemara, Lema, this is Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda. Lema Rav the Amma Rab Meir. Let's say that Rav holds like Rab Meir, Ushmuel the Amma Rab Yehuda, and Rabbi Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda. What's the Machlokes Tanoim? The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Listen to this. Omer leisha. If someone says to a woman, he wants to betroth her, and he says Hariat mikudeshesli, and again, if you've learned Kedushin or we've had references to this, you know that there are many cases the Gemara brings down about Kedushin with stipulations. Okay, Hariat mikudeshesli, the condition Almanas she'en loch olai she'er kesus v'aino. I'm marrying. You're going to marry me, but you don't have rights under the kesuba. I'm vitiating the kesuba. You have no rights of she'er kesus v'aina, clothing, money, relationships. Forget about it. The condition to marry me is that there's no kesuba. That's the case. That is the case. Okay.
Crazy
So
shit.
now the question is there a marriage or not?
The
Is there a
shotgun
marriage or not?
the shotgun should be fired for that one.
Okay, so listen to the Gemara. I mean, this is again the Gemara's limit. The answer is Harizumu Kudeshes. There is a marriage, right? Utanai bottle, but the Tanai is completely removed, as if it never was said. In other words, forget about what you said. We're accepting the Kedushin, but we're not accepting the Kanai. This is Divrei Rab Meir. And Rab Meir was always the more machmir. So he's saying, no. The Torah says that a man says to a woman, Hariat Mikudeshesli, you want to add a stipulation to the Hariat Mikudeshes, we're not going to let you. So you hear, Michael, that if it's now we're starting to understand the picture. The Torah says Hariat Mikudeshes is okay, but the Torah also says that you have to give Sher Ksus Va'ona. So if you want to mitigate Sher Ksus Va'ona from the marriage, we're not going to let you bifurcate it. And the whole thing, the marriage is marriage, and what your condition is no condition. That's Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So now again, now Rabbi Yehuda is going to parse. Rabbi Yehuda says, "V'davar shebemamon tanai kayim." When it comes to monetary matters, we're not as makbid. Then the tanai is kayim. What's the monetary matters? She'er v'ksus. She'er v'ksus means clothing, comfort, shelter, all things that are quantified by money. Those you are allowed to disqualify, right? But when it comes to non-monetary, oino means the relationship between a husband and wife, which is a non-monetary relationship, that you cannot mitigate. Okay, that's that Gemara. How do we bring it home? Says the Gemara. So the Gemara says that machlokes between the Tanoim, Rab Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, is the same as our machlokes by Oinoah between Rav and Shmuel. How? Okay, how? Omalach Rav. Rav will say to you, so stop a minute. So what's the machlokes? Let's talk out the machlokes. Rav, who says that when you say that it's vitiated, it's as if you never said it, he holds like Reb Meir, because Reb Meir was machmir. Reb Meir says you can't have a tanai like that on kedushin. The kedushin is a kedushin. Now, what's the parallel? Why are we even comparing these? Because Oinoah is min haTorah and kedushin is min haTorah. If kedushin, the Tanoim says min haTorah, and Hariyat Mekadeshes with the Tanai doesn't work, then it stands to reason that Oinoah, which is min haTorah, with a condition, doesn't work. That's why Rav would be paired with Rav Meir, because just like Rav Meir says you can't limit kedushin by putting a stipulation, so says Rav. Shmuel, on the other hand, says, wait a minute, no, if you make a stipulation, and that stipulation, even though Oinoah is midoraisa, but you make a stipulation that you can't have Oinoah, and it's, what is Oinoah? Monetary, therefore, it's no stipulation.
But
What
Rabbi,
does Yehuda say?
there's a fundamental difference, which was Reb Meir implied. So the marriage contract, it is kedushin, but there is consideration given to the woman for that kedushin. So, I'm going to marry you, and in exchange for that, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. That's the marriage contract. In this case, the only issue is, in the other case, the only issue is the value. What is the value of the exchange and what's there? But this is a fundamental marriage. So if you say the terms are not important when people get married, it is everything about the terms when people get married. And the father is not going to give the daughter away unless those terms are satisfied. It's not a marriage contract. So I think it's starkly different.
So again, it's a valid question. We're in the middle of the discussion, so I'm not going to give. I'm going to say
Don't ruin
it and go into it. But we're just starting to get into this to understand it. So your point is well taken, but at the same time, we need to further develop the thought process here to understand: is there a chilik between a marriage and a sale? The common denominator is that they're both midoraisa. So the question is, if you have a doraisa, regardless of whether it's something as heavy, so to speak, I mean, as a marriage, which is important, or maybe something not as critical as a sale, but each is governed under the Torah. The question is there a consistency in the Torah's thinking that no matter whether it's a heavy or not a heavy, the Torah has to be observed to the letter, and you can't make a condition for one and not for the other. That's really what
Rabbi, I just want to clarify. In kedushin, I have not learned kedushin. So is there more wiggle room if there is if the consideration is not exactly what was agreed to as far as the marriage?
So keep in mind, there is one very critical overarching component of kedushin which doesn't exist by others, and that is that in kedushin, if it isn't done just right and mistakes are made, and there's a question of is it a kedushin or not, the results are devastating. Because if you have a child, now you're dealing with something that is way beyond just the kedushin. In money, you make a mistake, it's a bad thing.
Right.
But what are the repercussions of money?
Right.
The repercussions of kedushin are much more severe. So is it really a fair comparison? That's what the question.
Exactly, yes.
Right. So again, these are all the important components of our discussion, which we're going to develop and understand further. So the question is it a fair machlokes between the Tanoim and the Amoraim? Are the Tanoim arguing about something that is so totally beyond what the Amoraim are arguing? Or is it on the surface the same because they're both Midaraisa? These are all competing interests. Every discussion has a different focus of the interest. The common denominator right now in a discussion is the Torah says Kedushin, the Torah says Oino. Now, we're going to get into Torah 1 and Torah 2, but the fact of the matter is that they're both there. All right, so the Chayra, it seems at surface, and we're going to maybe stop here, is that Rav holds like Rav Meir, and Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara is going to develop this further, which is why I think before we get into it, and the Gemara is going to try to go much deeper into this discussion between Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Meir and Yehuda. But at least on the surface, for our purposes, it seems that the Gemara wants to understand that, again, if you have the imprimatur of the Tanoim, and here you are hundreds of years later, Rav and Shmuel, a couple hundred, whatever it is, that they're having the machlokes to understand it, and now you want to say, wait a minute, you're not the first to have this machlokes. The Tanoim already had this machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. Then we have what's called, I guess, stare decisis. You have some historical precedent. You don't have to decide this. They already decided this a couple hundred years ago when they had the machlokes there. So that's why this whole discussion of Amoraim having a machlokes like the Tanoim is important, because if the Tanoim already had it and came to a conclusion, then you don't have to start from scratch and try to figure out now what the halacha is. We know the halacha because we already went through it. So, okay, so suffice to say that right now, this is what the comparison is, that Rav is holding like Reb Meir, that any Tanai doesn't hold water. Again, without getting into the nuances of the differences. A Tanai doesn't hold water, and according to Shmuel, it does hold water. But even Rabbi Yehuda, when he says it holds water, it's only for mominous, only for monetary, not for non-monetary, which is the relationship, the fundamental relationship between a husband and wife. That you can't legislate away. That you can't make a Tanai and say, we're not going to have marital relations, we're not going to have any right. That, even Rabbi Yehuda, who's lenient, says no. All right, so let's stop with this, and we'll pick up Mitzvah Shem and get into much more detail. But you see, Michael, your questions are, I mean, it's all valid, because when you look at it, to understand the depth of what the halacha is, I guess the halacha should be black and white. This is the halacha. But we find that even in halacha, there are shades of gray. We know this throughout now in history, and that's why if you know what the halacha is, you still have to go to a posek and get a psak, because that psak may have colors to it that isn't exactly what the Shulchan Aruch is saying. That's the absolute reason why you can't just rely on your own senses. Oh, I'm going to Shulchan Aruch, the halacha is pretty clear. Wait a minute, there are nuances to this, and that's what makes halacha such a vibrant, that today we can paskin halachas on things that were said thousands of years ago, because if you have the ability, the Ruach HaKodesh, you understand that halacha is a living, breathing element, and therefore what the halacha said then, how do you extrapolate it for today? That's the beauty of halacha. Anyway, so that's where we'll stop, and we're going to see, Michael, that there are a lot of variances to everything that we've been saying. So next week we'll pick up.
Yes,
Sure.
Go ahead. Very good discussion, and we're getting into a very interesting subject matter. So it may even have relevance to us today. So we'll go right there.
Not getting easier though.
Not getting easier, absolutely. But that's what makes it so interesting, Jay, is that we got to be on our toes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, everybody, have a good week. Mr. Shem, we'll see you next week.